Hello friends and welcome to my position 4 tier list. This is currently showing what I think is the pro meta of like, this is the best thing in the patch, whatever. We're going to adjust this for the pubs. If you want to see the position 5 tier list, that's already in a different video down in the description. Go check it out. Let's get started here. Many of the pros will only ever play like one of these top heroes in the professional matches. It's often like Shadow Demon and Tusk can be flexed. That's part of why they're so strong. Why you see them banned so early is because it's a powerful pick in position 4 or position 5, kind of makes it S tier. And often when they do get banned out, that's when you either get like Dark Willow or any of the others. Now you can kind of like move these around a little bit. It's every patch develops over time, but at the time of this video, this is kind of where I think it's at. Like these first two get banned out along with like Naga and Clockwork, who I think they prefer as a position 5. You usually see Clockwork go there, but he can play position 4. That's why I still think he's top tier. And then you just go for like any of these guys. You'll notice a lot of very active heroes here, paired with the strong offlaners, get active early, do things around the map. And everyone below that, like there's other heroes who could potentially fit that description, but based on the patch, the numbers, maybe they're just not as good at it right now. Okay, so for our pub games, we'll go down the list again. So Shadow Demon, I would move down a little bit. Just all his utility is a little bit lost in pub games. However, I still think if you're at the higher end of MMR, and you know how Shadow Demon works, he's still S to A tier. I'm going to put it in A tier for now. The lower in ranks you go, I would say he starts to drop because his own actual scaling is not amazing. He just synergizes really well with teammates. And in solo queue games, you kind of want a bit more power for yourself if you don't have teammates who really understand the game, which is kind of what you get in the lower ranks. So the lower you go, I'd move him down to like maybe C tier, but Legend and up, I think A tier. Tusk, so he actually usually has a lower win rate in like pub games, below 50%, just because he's very complicated. I kind of mentioned this in the position 5 tier list, but I do think so. Like carries, even in like my own games, you pick an aggressive 5, and it's like, I feel like playing Medusa, and you're like, okay, that's cool. And I know that problem just gets worse the lower in MMR you go. So Tusk as a position 5, I think is great, but then you get a really weak hero to match with, and it sucks. From the off lane as a position 4, that is less likely to happen just because more offlaners tend to be strong. There is, of course, at some point, people don't know what to pick, and you still get like a Luna off lane, and it's weird. But because of that, I think he's a better position 4 in pub games than a position 5. However, I still think the execution for this hero is quite high. If you know what you're doing, I would put him in B tier. If you don't know what you're doing, C tier, just because he's kind of tough. I'm going to put him in B tier for now as a position 4, but I'm a little caught between here. But if you know Tusk, like I said, S tier hero. Dark Willow, I do think mostly maintains her high rating even in pub games. I'm going to move her down to A tier. I think it's easier to play her in pubs compared to Tusk and Shadow Demon. Right now, people are going Throwing Shade just because Bedlam got nerfed, so you have to use it on yourself again, which is kind of where it used to be anyways. So along with Thorny Thicket getting nerfed, you go Throwing Shade, still a strong lane, and at some point you kind of get Blink Yules. You get close to people, and you do a ton of damage with Throwing Shade and Bedlam around yourself. And because you're position 4, you have higher levels and a little bit more farm to make sure you survive being up front. Position 5, Dark Willow, she likes being in the back, throwing out the Thorny Thicket brambles a bunch, throwing Bedlam on people. That's kind of why she dropped off as a position 5. She is still tricky, though. Like, her own unique combo is not as tough, I would say, as Tusk and Shadow Demon. You're less likely to accidentally grief teammates if you mess up your own spells, but to get full value out of them, you still have to land them. So you need to practice her a little bit, but I'm going to put her in A tier. I think she's pretty solid. Muerta 4 is very similar, but way harder to execute. So I'm going to put her down in C tier. I do think she's a very good position 4 right now, but if you cannot land Deadshot consistently, like if you miss once, you already tilt teammates, and the calling seems simple on paper, but the cast range is pretty short, and then where the ghosts line up, and yet you still zone them off in the correct way, right? You kind of like have to have those locked down. And if you start messing them, it's way more punishing for the hero to not land your spells compared to Dark Willow. So if you spend the time to learn Muerta, I do think she's good, and she has a lot of value in the fact that she's usually a carry, right? So as position 4, you can do normal things like build Atos, Force Staff, whatever, and then it's like, oh, I'm turning these into a Gleipnir and a Hurricane Pike, but that's okay, guys, right? It's getting late game, you know? So you play like a support, but you have that potential to scale as a carry, and I think that's really good. So if you love Muerta conceptually, like, go for it. But you gotta land the skill shots, otherwise it's below D tier. It's like F tier hero at some point. But as long as you know what you're doing, you can move her up a little bit. This time we have Hephaestus, but he is much less happy about being picked up. Okay, down you go, buddy. Down you go. Next on our list, Clockwork, not a cat. Clockwork, I'm a little torn between S and A tier. I don't know. I do think he's really good, and even in my video, I was like, he's the perfect support. Okay, you know what? We have to live up to our own thing. I'll put him in the S tier because I do think he just offers so much of what you need in pub games at every single bracket. The one downside is that his scaling is not as good as compared to something like Muerta, Dark Willow, stuff like that. But ultimately, he just offers so much, and he's in such a strong spot in the patch right now. I don't know. Maybe he's A tier, even in pubs, but we'll move him around later. Let's keep him here for now. Phoenix, I think, is pretty solid. I would do A or B tier. If you know Phoenix, A to S tier. If you don't know Phoenix all that well, maybe like B to C tier. But same as position 5, just not every pub player knows how to deal with Phoenix. So you end up having a pretty solid laning stage, even in cases you're not supposed to, just because you're very underestimated, in my opinion. So I'll put it in B tier for now. Hoodwink. So it used to be one of the best position 4s, and if you really know Hoodwink, I still think she's fairly good. I think she got hurt a lot in the nerf to Acorn Shot, which was rightfully so, and her win rate's pretty bad. But I think some of that is just people playing Hoodwink, because she's kind of a tricky hero to land the Q and the W, make sure you land your sharpshooters. So she ends up dropping a bit, I think, in win rate because of that. People just trying out Hoodwink. Oh, what's this annoying hero that's been killing me all the time? Let me try it out. And then they're garbage at it. But if you are a Hoodwink spammer, I think she's probably still like A to B tier. And I really like her scaling. I think her weaker laning stage currently is not nerfed as hard in pub games. And her scaling's good. I'm going to put her in B tier, even though I know the win rate doesn't fully match up to that. Snapfire, same as position 5. I just think the coordination is very, very iffy. But I will move her to C tier. I think she might have been C tier anyways. I think she's better as a position 4 for the same reason. Tusk, I think, right? Position 5, you end up with a lot of ranged carries in pub games, Drow, Medusas, types like that don't want to be cookied in. And if they don't want to be cookied in, you have to cookie yourself in. But you might have taken full bore. You probably should have if you're playing support Snapfire right now. And full bore requires that you're a little further back. So from the off lane, you're more likely to get the melee offlaners that you can cookie in full bore from afar without having to jeopardize your own position as a ranged hero. So I think as position 4, she's at least better than position 5 in pub games. Batrider position 4, you do want a little bit of a greedier start. I think that's easier to do as a position 4 in a lot of pub games. I do still think he's a tricky hero to run. I would put him in C or D tier. But I think he is a better position 4. I think the logic's similar to Snapfire. More good pairings with offlaners in pub games. Less likely for teammates to tilt out when they see you like farming your own stacks, stuff like that. Because like, oh, it's a position 4 Batrider, I guess. Versus like, why is my hard support just like jungling? You know, even though Batrider support does the same thing in both roles, but you're just more likely to see people accept it as a position 4 in pub games, I think. Lion's very average to me. I'm going to leave him in B tier. He is just average in the laning stage, and I think a lot of people will not punish him properly. Like, you'll get stunned and mana drained, and a lot of people just run away instead of fighting Lion because he just used his spells. That's actually when he's weak, but many people just panic and leave. So he does better in the lanes in pub games than he's supposed to. He's got the scaling on the Finger of Death. You know, he's a classic. He's got a lot of crowd control, but because he's just not that strong of a laner, and I don't think his stats, spells, all of that are in a particularly amazing spot, he is just very average to me. And the win rate, I think, is lowered a little bit by people doing super griefy builds like Ags, Midas, things like that. And if you just play like a normal support, just fairly average. Grimstroke, same as Bat Rider Snapfire, won't repeat myself too much. You need the combos. You're more likely to get it as a position 4 than a position 5, but still you have to coordinate with teammates, so C tier. Bounty, I think, is actually S tier at high MMRs as a position 4 right now. They keep buffing this hero, trying to get him into pro play, and pros are finally starting to touch him a little bit. The issue is you are so much about track, right? And if you can get kills and get extra gold and keep that momentum going, it's great. But so many pros know how to deal with that and play around it, so you never get track kills. But you know the chaos of pub games, and so you're very likely to end up with a lot of fights that are beneficial to you. You start stacking up that gold, and you get a nice lead off of that. But some pub games are extremely passive, with people picking a lot of heavy farmers. Even though they see you first pick the bounty, they pick a ton of just passive heroes. And you really struggle in those games, is what I used to say, except now you have through and through as a facet, which means your shuriken does damage to everything it goes through. This actually allows you to be invis, go really deep on the enemy's half the map, intercept the creep wave, shuriken through it, and then it almost dies. You kind of have to wait around a little bit to throw a second shuriken. It's kind of dangerous to wait that long, but at high-ranked games, you're more likely to get teammates who will work with you, so you don't have to do that stuff, but it could be an option for you. And at lower-ranked games, people have less reaction times to see that you're creep cutting and go instantly react and punish you for it while you're trying to wait for your shuriken cooldown to come back up and throw it through again to like finish farming the wave. So now I actually think Bounty does have something to do in passive games. Like he has more natural farming speed if his teammates do not do anything. So the higher ranked games, I think S to A tier. Low ranked games, it is up to you how you feel the games go. If you feel you get tons of passive games and no one's doing anything, he's going to be D tier. If you are in the type of pub game where it is endless fighting and no one knows how to farm, it's just fight, that's where Bounty's really good. He becomes S tier again. I think Marcy B tier sounds about right. If you know what you're doing, good rebounds, good dispose, pretty strong, more likely to get the ideal pairings in the off lane compared to the safe lane, Marcy's. So, you know, I just think very middle ground hero, but you do want to have a good early game. Your own farming speed is really not that great since you have to rebound off of creeps. You can really only farm creep waves, which, you know, maybe your whole team's in the jungle, it's fine. But if you have to get farm in the jungle, it's a little slow compared to other heroes. But your scaling is pretty good if you can have a good early game and go from there, because you do see the core Marcy's. Nyx Assassin, he's a menace in pub games. I'm a little torn between A and B tier. His laning stage is kind of weak, so you either need to A, play at a rank where they're not really going to punish your laning stage and it's fine, or B, you have a really good understanding of creep equilibrium, you know how to do creep dragging, things like that. You get through that laning stage, get to your Dagon, and just start being a pub menace. Invis heroes are always a pain to deal with, even though I think a lot of people know how to deal with it a little bit more. Like people are buying sentries, people are buying dust. The team positioning to play around invis heroes and not be picked off is so tough to get in pub games. Like either you get teammates that know it or they don't. And no one can ever successfully explain, like, listen guys, because there's a Nyx and there's a Bounty, like we need to play this way. And they're like, oh, I get it. Okay. It never happens. You know it or you don't. And that's it. So because of that, I'm kind of tempted to put him in A tier. He does just feel like a hero who can take over the game if you really understand what you're doing. But you got to know what you're doing to get through the laning stage to get to that point. Rubik, I think as a position 4, if there's good spells, you're going to look good. He is a tricky hero. I don't think he's as strong as he used to be, but also just feels very average to me. Again, like if you know what you're doing on Rubik, it could be good, but then you also have to get a little bit lucky that in your first pick Rubik that you end up against opponents that have some good spells. He's not been as strong as before, so I would put him somewhere between B and C tier. His win rate's also really bad. I might put him in C tier just to dissuade some of you guys who don't know Rubik right now, like from playing him. I don't know. I'm torn on this one. Let's leave him in B tier, maybe. I'll think on it. Io, you guys know, it's just garbage trying to coordinate with people. Gyro, I think, is pretty average as a position 4. The downside of Gyro 4 compared to Gyro 5 is that it's harder to run people down with Rocket Barrage, but in pub games where people are moving out of position anyways, it's kind of fine. I don't think it's as strong as it used to be, but it's okay. I also very average. You know, I feel a little bit better about if I saw like a gyro on my team compared to Rubik. Well, maybe it's similar. I don't know. Hey, tier lists are totally subjective, guys. I'm gonna leave it for now. Enchantress. Well, no. Still the same in pub games. Like if you know it, sure, you can make it work, but it's difficult to get the right momentum outside of like Divine plus games. But there is the scaling of that hero if you want to play that way. Pugna position 4, also not a huge fan of it in pub games right now. I think it's just okay. I just think people aren't going to play around it properly. Dawnbreaker, I think I'll leave her in C tier. I think I don't know, the global ability is just really good in pub games. And the QW combo, I'd say, is not the strongest it's ever been, but a lot of people will underestimate it, so it'll still work once you have a good feel for it and you have the right pairings. So I think C tier sounds about right. And same for Weaver. Used to be a lot stronger with the free Geminate attack, but many people still underestimate you. You get through that little weak point, and then the mid to late game support Weaver is still pretty similar. I actually want to kind of try Weaver again a little bit more since he got that XP Hive Mind buff. I know it's been a little bit since he got that. I just haven't gotten around to playing him because there's been so many other heroes. I don't know. Maybe I'll also wait for a patch. I just think it's something you can do if you want, but it's just not that great. Keeper of the Light 4 is not great right now, but easier to run than position 5. Like if nothing else, you can at least get the Hard and the Ancient camp stacks. I'll leave him in C tier for now, I think. Skywrath, I would move up. I think he's not the strongest he's ever been, but in pub games, it's not as noticeable, and the ultimate kill threat is still there. If you know what you're doing, I think I've been saying that so much, but I mean, that's what Dota is, right? Like if you know what you're doing, then you can make a hero look better or worse. But Skywrath feels pretty average to me in pub games right now. Treant position 4, I don't like as much as position 5, but you can do it. I think C tier is about right. Depending on your MMR, which I always say this at different parts of the tier 4 tier list, position 4 tier list, there we go. Position 5s, if you want to play them as position 4s, you can, and you will be less punished for it if you are like Archon or lower, just because both lanes play very similarly in those brackets. The higher up you go, though, the position 4 is typically a little bit more active, going to be like stronger, farm more, things like that. Like there is a difference between position 4 and position 5. That's why I don't love seeing position 5s in position 4s, but you will notice certain heroes like Warlock and Lich have really high win rates in both position 4 and 5 in pub games, and that's because it just does not matter as much when people aren't following the meta as much. So because of that, if you really like Treant, it is fine, but I am going to leave him in C tier. Earth Spirit, also C tier. He does what he does. It's just not particularly great right now, but he's a decent mid laner right now. And so you can do similar stuff as a position 4, but you have less farm, your timings are slower, all that. But if you know how to play really fast, Earth Spirit can be good. It just requires that active level gameplay. And if you don't get that, then his farming speed and scaling is not as good as others. Spirit Breaker, I would move him up. But where? A or B tier? He's just one of those heroes, the global presence I value a lot in pub games, and the stuns, especially the BKB bashes, BKB piercing bashes, and the ultimate and all that, ends up being quite strong and what your team lacks a lot. And you'll tilt out the mid laners with like a single charge to the mid lane. So even though he's not in the greatest spot he's ever been, I'd still just think he's really good in pub games. Maybe he should be B tier, but we'll put him in A tier for now. Tiny position 4 is not great. He was like super broken for a while. Absolute S tier in mid position 4, kind of every role really. But they nerfed him because of that. And at his current state, he works as a mid laner after the other key ones have been banned out and you need a playmaker. But you don't really see much position 4 Tiny. I think the laning stage just isn't good enough. The item timings are slow compared to other stuff. Like Tiny 4, you really need a blink, right? But look at these others. Level 6, you're jumping in on fights. Like all these heroes don't really need to wait for a 2,000 gold item that he's not even the fastest farmer, you know? So many of these heroes are just stronger than Tiny right now. C tier is about right. ET, if you know what you're doing, I think he's going to look good. I'm going to put him B tier for now just because it kind of covers the range. The lower MMRs, not as good. Higher MMRs, he's pretty good, especially the specialist. Might deserve to be A tier because of that. But B tier is where I'm going to put him for now. Enigma position 4. I'm a little torn on this one. Just because he's really not the active type of hero you'd love from a position 4, but that just doesn't matter in some pub games. So I think C tier is all right. Like, as long as you know how to use the Eidolons, send them to camps to block them, use them to deny, harass, things like that, I think you can play Enigma support, scale into the black hole in the mid to late game. C tier. Monkey King. So the lane's pretty tricky for Monkey King 4 support, and Simian Stride used to be broken. Conceptually still is, but they increased the threshold to now 95%, and that means if you take a little bit of damage, like one spell essentially, you kind of lose Simian Stride. And that makes it tricky to move around the map. Fortunately, position 4 Monkey King probably will build Tranquil Boots compared to like a mid or a carry Monkey King, so it's a little easier to maintain 95% health or higher. But say like a team fight, you go for a gank, get hit by a stray spell, you lose Simian Stride, you can't hop around as much. That's kind of where that nerf comes into play. Neutrals can now cancel some of the cooldown too. That wasn't a thing before. So because of the awkward laning stage and the fact that Simian Stride is not as good as it used to be, I think he's a little meh. I do think... See, the other thing is, we were in a Gleipnir meta, so there was just tons of ranged carries, and Monkey King didn't love that. Gleipnir got nerfed, but we are still seeing a decent amount of ranged carries at the high-level meta, whatever. In your pub games, if you feel like you run into mostly melee carries, people love, like, Juggernaut, for example. That's where Monkey King 4 is an easier time, just like, bop, 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 and people, because they're melee, and you have the staff range. So if you think you get a lot of those types of matchups and you know how to play Monkey King, I would move him up a little bit. You got that scaling potential, things like that. But otherwise, I think C tier is about right. Okay, Tinker, I forgot to include in my position 5 tier list. I left a comment and pinned it, but in case you didn't see that, you're wondering about it. So Tinker 5 and 4 is very similar to me because it is. You do the exact same thing, you just start in a different lane, but ultimately you want to hit level 6 and you want to farm the different parts of the map that your team does not want to go to. And I'm not just talking about like they're playing top, so I'm in the bottom lane pushing. That is true. But you have heroes sieging the top tower, someone is pushing like the mid lane, someone's farming the safe lane, and you're farming the jungle that no one wants to move towards, ideally. And that is how you capitalize on it, because usually no one would be there. Like, you would be part of the push, for example, and so then the jungle just goes unutilized. But the value of Tinker and the global rotations that you are farming that jungle, then you show up to the team fight. But this requires your team to not already be in the jungle, and you need them to be doing things so that March of the Machines and barriers and whatever items you buy can buff them up. That is Tinker's biggest issue in pub games, more so than anything else. So like Null Talismans got nerfed, and Tinker loved Null Talismans. They're still pretty good. I still see Tinker supports buy like 1 or 2 of them at high level games, but maybe more likely to be 1 instead of 2 compared to when they doubled in value prior to this patch. The auras got nerfed a little bit, but they got nerfed for everyone, so it's not like a huge deal to Tinker. He still just has a decent laning stage into this global presence, which is awesome, but so many pub drafts don't go with this. And I dropped off of Tinker support a little bit because it was so broken, it was working no matter what. Now it's at the point where you kind of need a good Tinker game, and so many drafts just are not a good Tinker game, and so many teammates, even with the right heroes, do not play the way you need them to for Tinker support to really shine. And that's why I hold him a little bit lower on the tier list compared to what it might look like win rate wise at like Dota 2 Pro Tracker or something like that, where it looks really good. It's because those pros will see it and they're like, okay, yeah, Tinker's good. Like, here's how we play around it. And you just don't get that as much. So I think whether 4 or 5, if you have a good draft, you play with friends, things like that, it could be great. If you want to rely on the fact that the game will probably drag on really, really late, and you're going to scale up, then sure, also pretty good. But otherwise, like, it's just so, that early game is so awkward in so many games I have played Tinker in that I feel very on. So I might put him somewhere. In the ideal Tinker game, I would put him A tier. Or like, not the ideal Tinker game, I guess, is like S tier, like every hero. But in like a solid Tinker game, A tier. Otherwise, it's B to C tier or even lower. The more greedy teammates you have, the more Tinker drops further and further down below whatever the hell's below D tier. So I think he stays in C tier, maybe up to B tier, but we'll move on for now. I've said a lot about Tinker. Let's keep going. Medusa support is kind of real. Gorgon's Grasp and the Snake are actually pretty good laning tools. You're pretty tanky with the mana shield, but it's right at that edge where it's griefy but good, and it's tough to know where it should really be. I think it could maybe use a slight buff to be truly good. And if you have an aggressive lane partner, especially someone who can set up the double hit on Gorgon's Grasp, because there's a slight overlap and you'll actually get double damage if you hit them with both, where one of the overlaps are. But Gorgon's Grasp is such a slow ability, it's really hard to do yourself except by chance. So if you have an offlaner who stuns for you and then you line up the Gorgon's Grasp to get double damage, ends up being pretty good, but it's pretty matchup dependent, and you're going to have a lot of teammates who are not very happy to see the Medusa for. Because of that, I think it's probably just not worth your while. I would put it in D tier, but if you got friends who you play with and you can maybe, bait out some counter picks to the Medusa and you're like, ha ha ha, I'm just a support, you get a good offlaner, I do think there's some value to it. I would, in a solid Medusa support game, I'd put it like a B tier. But I just don't think you're going to get that very often because you might be reported already from the draft phase. And, D tier. D tier because of that. Alk4, I think, is a little more accepted than Medusa, but maybe still not a bunch. It depends how much your teammates happen to keep up with high-level Dota. You will see support Alchemist. You take seed money. You just get a lot of good starting items. Concoction and Acid Spray are really good, especially if you can get an offlaner who has negative armor synergy. For example, Slardar. Then it ends up working. You build like Solar Crest, the 1 or 2 support items, eventually get ags for people. I think it's okay. Again, you just run the risk of people being like, Alk support's not real, I'm reporting you. And you're like, please, I'm trying so hard, I just like weird things. Yeah, so I think he's a little better than Medusa though. A little easier to run as well, so C tier. Sniper support was a thing for a brief, beautiful moment. It got hurt pretty hard by the scattershot nerf. If you do want to run it, it's doable, and I'd say better than some of these others that we haven't quite gotten to yet, especially because you'll still kind of catch people off guard. You are seeing, so more people are likely to start headshot rather than shrapnel with a scattershot facet. You still take the scattershot facet, for the record. You take that, but the level 1 got hurt a lot because it went from 120 to 90 damage, which doesn't sound like that much. But then you got to remember the whole point of this facet is that you can launch 3 in quick succession. So really, you lost 90 damage off your kill threat. That's quite a lot. And you kind of need to get a kill at level 1, get that quick boost in gold, be annoying, get the next set of scattershot, repeat. And the fact that just got hurt so much, pretty painful. But that's kind of why people are going headshot first, just like ha-ha-ing people in the laning stage. At some point, you max scattershot. What that point is, some would say is level 7, but who really knows? At that point, sniper support's kind of the same as it was in the past. So if you're not really getting punished in the laning stage for your weaker level 1, level 2 kind of, levels of shrapnel, it still works if you want to do it, but I just think it's not as good. It went from A to B tier to now B to C tier, in my opinion. It's also got the grief factor, so I think we got to put it in C tier. All right, this might not be a very popular opinion, but I think Pudge is pretty average support in pub games. And I know it's very easy to grief with Pudge, but a lot of opponents will also just make mistakes. They will just get hooked when they're not supposed to, especially in those late game scenarios after your team's been losing for 30 minutes because Pudge was in the jungle, not doing much. I know, but then one hook under your tier 4s into the fountain and a BKB piercing ult, and suddenly your team's back in it because that enemy carry's not saving buyback, and they just Fed and 100 death timer, you know, like it's how it works. You love it or hate it. Pudge land hook is good. Pudge no land hook is bad. It's very dependent on the Pudge player. You never know what you're gonna get. If you hate it, you ban it. If you guys are open to it like me, I do think there are games where like Pudge does what he needs to do. So I really don't mind when I see a Pudge on my team. It's just a roll of the dice what you're gonna get, but in the end, to me, it just ends up being average is where it's at right now. So that's where I'm gonna put him. Magnus 4, if you know what you're doing, bump him up. I would say like a good Magnus is maybe like a B tier. Not very popular. Not gonna see a lot of people do it. I think he's more D tier. Invoker's really not that great as a support right now. The innate ability really lends itself to being a mid hero. Don't think it's amazing. Venge 4 in pubs does work better. I would probably put her B tier just because same as Pudge Hook, the ultimate is very strong to just swap people out of position. And your laning stage is kind of weak, but pub games, it doesn't matter as much. Primal Beast 4, really not a lot of people are doing it anymore, but you can if you really want to. I would put it in D tier still just because of that. I just don't think it's great, especially against some of the other meta supports. Like, imagine trying to be Primal Beast versus a Clockwork. Is going to be horrible. Versus Brambles, versus Disruption, right? There's so many things that make Primal Beast 4 not good right now, and you might not see any of them because pub games don't really follow the meta. So that's why, like, if you really want to do it, you could. Chen, you gotta have the micro. I still think that the tempo of pub games won't really be what he wants, so I don't really even consider Chen a 4. I really think he's just a position 5, but he's on here just because, I'm going to take him off. Because I was about to say, because in pub games, you can play position 5s as position 4s. But you know what? That's true for all of them. So I don't know why I have Chen there, but then I don't have something like Warlock on here. I would rather have a Warlock 4 than a Chen. Well, let me think about that. Because if a Chen player wanted to be position 4, I wouldn't care. But if just a generic support player is like, I'm going to take Warlock 4, I guess that just comes down to I'd rather have a Chen on my team than a Warlock. But I don't know, guys. What you get the point. Position 5s can be position 4s. It's just not ideal if you get to a certain level. Leshrac 4, I think, is okay. I think people will mess up versus Misanthropy, and your Shard's still really good. I would put him like a C tier position 4. I think he's better than some of these guys. Terrorblade, I just kept him on here just to remember to take him off this list. It's really not a position 4 anymore after his Q got nerfed. If you really wanted to, you probably could make it work. I just don't think it's great. Techie's win rate, really not that good. I don't exactly know where to pinpoint it, but it doesn't feel as strong in the laning stage and throughout the game. But I do think he's better than some of these other D tier position 4s. So I'd put him in C tier. Wyvern, kind of similar to the position 5s. There's a brief moment where she was really good. I don't think this is it. I'd rather see a Wyvern 5 unless you're a Wyvern specialist. I'm actually just going to take her off the list as well. Wind Ranger's really not in a good spot. I wouldn't play her. Nature's, I think, to me, he's actually very similar as a support in power level to Wind Ranger. But just the fact that global rotations are always good in pub games, I think puts a lot of value to Nature's, even when he himself is not in an amazing spot as a support. So I'll put him in C tier. Mirana, I also think she's really not in a great spot. But in pub games, the scaling is good. And the fact that Arrow could just casually win you the game by accident, very good. Shadow Shaman always has a really high win rate. He might be S tier for certain ranks. I'm just going to put him at A for now. I know a lot of people don't think of him as a position 4 anymore. It's funny. It's been it's swapped back and forth a bit. But he just got a buff to his... okay, it's called Cluster Cluck, but that's actually not even what got buffed. It's his innate ability that got buffed, so that's always good for him. Pub games, the ultimate is a way to solo win. Really good lockdown that people aren't going to focus you on. Because of that, he's just a classic pub winner. Zeus actually has a decent win rate as a position 4, pairs pretty well with some aggressive offlaners. I think in the right game, he maybe could be like A to B in the right game. I think a lot of it'll be like C to D just because you won't get an ideal draft and then he's like too greedy. But I do think he's a little better than some of these other heroes. I'll put him here. Bane feels pretty average. I think he's a better position 5. So maybe I should put him C tier. A lot of people won't cancel your stuff. I'm going to put him C tier. Even though I think his win rate is very comparable to Earthshaker, who I'm not going to put in B tier. I think Earthshaker is just a more classic position 4, though. More people know how to play around it, and it works across more brackets. Like, I think Bane as a position 4 works in lower brackets. I'd rather see him as a 5 than higher brackets. Earthshaker, I think, is a perfectly viable position 4 at all ranks, although his laning stage is a little tricky. The higher ranked players will know how to do that. The lower ranked players won't be punished for it. So because that, at some point you could get a good echo or block someone off with fissure. You end up with a solid impact in pretty much every game. B tier. Venomancer's not great right now. I would put him in C tier. He will do what he needs to, but it's just not amazing. Witch Doctor for pubs, still pretty good. I would say especially for mid ranks to lower ranks, where you'll still get good Cask Maledict ult combos. I do think he's a better position 5, but if I'm just trying to be realistic here, it works. And I would actually put Warlock in here as well. I know I said I wouldn't put too many position 5s in here, but I just know a lot of people do it, and it works. It works. We could argue it's not supposed to, but it does. So if you wanted to play some of these heroes in both roles, especially if you are legend or lower, it's fine. The higher up you go, I think it starts to work less and less. Sven's not a really great position 4 anymore. If you really want to run him, it's a position 5, and it's like kind of C tier in the ideal Sven game just because of the nerfs. I would not really consider him a position 4 right now. Drop him. Morphling 4 kind of died off. It didn't even get directly nerfed. I just think other heroes are better, and that's kind of it. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but I did a quick double check. I really don't think he got nerfed. I think it's just relative to other heroes he dropped, so even pros don't really want to play him. If he gets buffed a little bit, or maybe some of these other supports get nerfed, I think Morphling 4 could maybe come back, and if you want to do it, like, it's still doable. I'll leave him on the list, but it's just not in a great spot. Naga is it's funny to see her down here, right? She's like an S tier position 5, but she is one of the heroes that, like, you can kind of do both roles with a lot of heroes, and if you really needed to, you could with Naga, and in pub games, it'll be okay. But at high levels, I just don't think position 4 is where she shines. I think position 5, you just want to be annoying in the lane with Deluge. You can reel people in under your tower. That's much harder to do from the 4 support role. Song reset, don't really need a ton of farm for that, so you can be position 5 instead of position 4. Now, funny enough, she does scale up if need be. She can take a lot of risks, go to the enemy's half of the map, use Song to get out, use illusions, but you kind of want to... It's like counterintuitive. Even though you end up with a lot of farm doing that play style, the idea is that you draw a lot of attention to yourself, and you might die a lot for it. So I kind of rather have the position 5 do that rather than the position 4. So even though she ends up being a fairly farm support, the risks she takes is better to have your position 5 take that rather than the position 4. So at the high levels, you only really see position 5 Nagas. In pubs, if you really enjoy Naga, I'd put her C tier, but I do think she's pretty tricky to get right with the Song. I can't remember where I put her in position 5. I might have had her in D tier. And I kind of feel similarly in the position 4, so kind of put her down here. Ringmaster, I think he's really good in pubs. I think he's a little tricky. I think he could be potentially an S tier hero, but he doesn't even have a facet or an Ags yet. And he did just get nerfed a little bit. So let's put him in A tier for now. You do have to be comfortable with the button presses, keep track of what souvenirs you have. But he's pretty good. You just don't see pros playing him because he's not in captain's mode. People in Dota 2 Pro Tracker, you will see him up there, and he has a very good win rate. I'm going to throw Lich in here as well, even though I know I'm not going to put too many of the position 5s in there, but I do think if you were going to play a position 5 as a position 4, now is the time to play Lich 4, just because I do think he's pretty strong right now, and I would be more willing to go, say, the left talent that increases at 10, that increases your Q damage because you could use that to farm faster and go for a faster like Blink, Ags, Shard build. Be a greedy version of Lich from position 4, but kind of do very similar things as a position 5. And that's why like higher rank games, I wouldn't recommend that. But like I did it. I tested Lich 4 and it works in my game. So like, that's just the nature of pub games. You don't really have to worry about the pro meta that much. So any position 5 can do it, but if I was going to play some position 5s as a position 4, I would prefer Lich compared to, say, like Warlock and Witch Doctor. I think I'm mostly happy with this. I think I'm going to move Tinker up, though. In low ranks, his win rate is not great, but high ranks, it's pretty good, which to me really suggests it's about how you play Tinker. And in the right games, it'll still be good. So I think he deserves more than C tier. All right, that's it. I'm going to end here. Ta-da! Tier list. Feel free to move a hero up or down a tier or so. It's all subjective. Just learn the heroes you like, and you can win with them in pub games. You don't have to feel that constricted by this stuff, but I do know people are curious about it, so here it is, my own take on it. Thank you for watching, guys. I don't know how much longer this tier list will be viable, so follow it if you want or don't. I will see you in the next video.